Hi everyone, the Partial Prophet here. Thanks for tuning in. So I wanted to remind you that we know in part and we prophesy in part. And then when Jesus comes, we will see fully. Okay, so today I wanted to talk about the grapes of wrath, Trump's full cup. Okay, so first I wanted to start out with so I've been thinking that we might be in this pattern of multiple Hanukkah weeks, and it started at Hanukkah, which was December 22nd. And so, what I'd like to propose is that um, there that we are now in the fifth Hanukkah week. Um, and so, what I did here is I made a chart of the 5 weeks. And so, if you're aware of the Hanukkah menorah, you would have 4 branches, and then you would have the main branch in the middle, and then 4 more branches. So then you would have 9 candles total. And so then the fifth week of Hanukkah would be kind of a picture of that middle branch. So like the middle. And so then after the fifth week of Hanukkah, there'd be 4 more Hanukkah weeks. And so what I did was I charted the ones that we have been through already, what has happened on day 3 and then day 8 of the different weeks. Because it started with our first Hanukkah, we had Christmas on the 3rd day of Hanukkah. And so that's why I picked day 3. And then significant things have been happening on day 8 too. So that's why I decided to chart those 2 days. And so in the first Hanukkah, which was December 23rd to December 30th, like I said, day 3 was Christmas. And then on that day too, there was a missile shot into Israel, and Netanyahu had to be escorted into a bomb shelter while he was campaigning. And then on day 8, so day 8 of Hanukkah, the Jewish people call it Zot Hanukkah, which means like this is Hanukkah. And so you get this picture of like when all 8 candles are burning, that is what Hanukkah represents. And so on the 8th day of Hanukkah, it was one of the days, one of the 1335 days, and I talked about that a little bit in my last video, that there's kind of a bunch of days that I'm keeping track of to get these different 1335 numbers. And then it was also 7 months, 17 days after May 14th of 2019. And then it was the 24th day from 12/6, which, we know 12/6/2017 was when Trump first made his announcement that he was going to move the embassy to Jerusalem. And so 12/6 of 2019 would be the 2-year anniversary of that. And then also on that day, there was a fire tornado that killed a fireman in Australia, in their terrible fires that they're having there. Okay, so that's the first Hanukkah. The second Hanukkah on day 3 was when the United States killed Soleimani. And then also too, let me think. What day was that? Okay. That was also the day that Israel was working on their gas pipeline deal. And then day 8, which would have been January 7th, was the Orthodox Christmas Day. And then that was also the day that was the funeral of Soleimani. And then that was the day that Iran dropped missiles on 2 U.S. bases, and they shot down a Ukrainian plane, which was sad. And then on Hanukkah 3, on day 3 of Hanukkah 3, would be what I consider Yom Kippur, because it's the 10th day of January, and I talked about January also kind of being like a 7th month, like we're repeating the patterns of the 7th month on the Hebrew calendar, because we have like the Gentile New Year. And so that kind of fits with, because that was the story of Solome's daughter, and I talked about that in a previous video. And then on day 8 of that Hanukkah was what I called the Trump impeachment ceremony, because that was when Nancy Pelosi made a big deal about signing the papers and handed out pens, and they had a big parade going to the Senate to deliver the impeachment papers. And then in Hanukkah number 4, on day 3, was the Armenian Christmas Eve, which is where they have a big processional through from Jerusalem to Bethlehem, I think, is where they go. And then, you know, and that's would be like the last Christmas that anyone celebrates. And then on day 8 was when Trump made the announcement that he was going to release his peace plan before Tuesday. And then that was when Pence invited Netanyahu and Gantz to come to the White House for the release of the peace plan. So definitely important days. And then, so with Hanukkah 5, I have that going from January 24th to January 31st. So what I wrote was, like for January 24th, which would be the first day of the 5th Hanukkah, I wanted to mention that that was when we saw the explosion in Houston, and then there was a Turkey earthquake. And the reason why I wanted to mention that to you was because I put in this Haggai verse down at the bottom of the screen, where, let me read this to you. Then the word of the Lord came a second time to Haggai on the 24th day of the month, saying, Speak to Zerubbabel, governor of Judah, saying, I am going to shake the heavens and the earth. I will overthrow the thrones of kingdoms, and I will overthrow the chariots, excuse me, and their riders, and the horses and their riders will go down, everyone by the sword of another. So I thought that was kind of interesting. You know, we saw the shaking happening on January 24th. So definitely very interesting. And then day 3 of this Hanukkah would have been like the end of winter on the Jewish calendar. And then that was the Kobe Bryant helicopter crash, which was really sad. And what was interesting was his numbers. Like he was number 24 in the NBA, but he also was number 8 at one time, and then his daughter was number 2 on her team. And so I thought it was significant that these numbers are showing up, cause especially this 24 number, because I really think God wanted to emphasize 24, you know, because he said, you know, on the 24th about, you know, going to shake the heavens and the earth. So I think that might be what he's trying to say. And then the 8th day of this Hanukkah, which would be January 31st, is the 24th day after Solome's funeral. So maybe it's an important day that we should be watching if God's given us this 24 sign through the helicopter crash. And then on the 31st, Trump is going to be 73 years, 7 months, and 17 days old. And then what's very interesting too on that day is it's 9 months and 17 days after the Notre Dame fire. And so I thought that day was really significant because I think this is in the book of Ezra. It talks about they gathered on the 9th month in the 20th day, but that was after taking 3 days to gather everyone. So I think the 9th month and the 17th day is a very significant day that we would want to look at. Okay, and then I wanted to talk about, I think another pattern that we might be seeing is what I call like the last 2 weeks of Trump. And so since I consider January to be like a type of 7th month, we would have Sukkot would be on the 15th through the 21st. And there's a couple different things that make this the 7th month, because it's 7 months. Okay, so let's see. Let me look this up for you. On the 20th, it was 7 months. So it's really interesting because these two dates of 7 months are kind of on both sides of the 21st date of the month. So on the 20th, it was 7 months, the 7-month anniversary after Trump changed his mind on going to war with Iran. We were just about to go to war with Iran, and then Trump changed his mind at the last minute 7 months ago. And then on the 22nd, that was 7 months after the financial plans were released for the Trump's deal of the century. So definitely very significant. And the 21st is the anniversary of Tu B'Shavat, and then also the blood moon, super blood moon that we saw at the beginning of last year in January. Oh, and then also, like I list here on the 21st, it's 9 months after Easter. So definitely a very interesting date. So I think we have the Sukkot date that's from January 15th to the 21st. And so on January 15th, like I said, that was the impeachment ceremony. It was 9 months after the Notre Dame fire. So I think that's very interesting. And then what else to me is very interesting is that it's week 110. Because we read in the scriptures, I think it could be Joshua, and maybe Joseph too, that dies at 110 years old. Okay, in my notes, it's definitely Joseph, but I thought I might have saw Joshua, but I'm not really sure. But anyways, that 110 is important. And then the second week, and the reason why I follow a second week is because of these verses in First Kings, which I'll get to in a second here. But that would be January 22nd to 28th. And so what I thought was kind of interesting in this week is that we had 3 days of the Democrats presenting their case in Trump's trial, and that was on the 22nd, 23rd, and 24th. And then we had 3 days of kind of like Trump's defense, and those happened, it's not consecutive, but it's 25, 27, and 28. And so then on January 28th was when Trump released his deal of the century. So definitely a very interesting week. Okay, so let me read the First Kings verses to you. So 1 King 8:65 to 66. So Solomon observed the feast at that time, and all Israel with him, a great assembly from the entrance of Hamath to the brook of Egypt, before the Lord our God, for 7 days and 7 more days, even 14 days. On the 8th day he sent the people away, and they blessed the king. Then they went to their tents, joyful and glad of heart, for the goodness the Lord had shown to David, his servant, and to Israel, his people. So I wanted to propose that this would be like the last 2 weeks of the 62 that we see in Daniel. It shows up a couple times in Daniel, this number 62. And I talked about how with the number 62, we have 60 plus 2 weeks. And so this 60 would be connected to the 666 of Trump. And then we would have 2 more weeks that we were looking for. So I'm wondering if it's possible that it's these 2 weeks. And so that comes from Daniel 9:25 to 26. And it says, so you are to know and discern that from the issuing of a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, there will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. It will be built again with plaza and moat, even in times of distress. Then, after the 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off and have nothing, and the people of the Prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. And its end will come with a flood, even to the end. It will be war. Desolations are determined. So that's what I'd like to propose there. And then I wanted to go on and read the next verse, which was Daniel 9:27, where it says, and he will make a firm covenant with the many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week he will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering, and on the wing of abominations will come one who makes desolate, even until a complete destruction, one that is decreed, is poured out on the one who makes desolate. So one theory that I had was, what if the covenant with many is Trump's trial? And so, so that would be a week. They kind of, when they sat down, they were trying to schedule out what was going to happen during the trial. So they, that would be a covenant with many. They made, a covenant of how long, what days to do what for the trial. And then it talks about in the middle of the week, in this verse, it talks about in the middle of the week, there would be a stop to sacrifice. So I was wondering if that was the 23rd, where Trump announced that he would release his peace plan, or it could also be like the 24th, when Trump spoke at March for Life. So we see kind of like this plea for stopping the sacrifice of the babies at the March for Life rally. And then, with the release of the peace plan, it would be kind of like a stop to the sacrifice of the Jewish people, if you could actually accomplish peace with the Palestinians. And then on the 25th, which would still be, in the middle of the week, I propose that would be a picture of the stop to the grain offering. So like if the grain would be a picture of the Christians, and so grain offering would be like, trying to, offer up the president as a sacrifice. And so, kind of putting a stop to that would be a picture that would be the start of his defense in the trial that started on the 25th. So that's what I'd like to propose. And so what I'm wondering is that if, because I kind of believe in multiple fulfillments of prophecies, and I also kind of think is that what we're going to see with some of the prophecies is that we have Trump, who's being a false messiah, is going to come and he's going to look like the Messiah because he's going to do things that look like he's fulfilling prophecy, but it's not the like true fulfillment of the prophecy. That there really wasn't a stop to sacrifice with his peace plan. And then but we're going to see when Jesus comes and he has his week that we're going to see a real true stop to sacrifice. And and a true stop to grain offering when Jesus comes. So that's what I like to propose, and I'm kind of wondering too when Jesus shows up is if it's going to be like a trial, like we are going to be on trial when Jesus shows up. um, and so we're going to see kind of like two trials in a row. So that's what I was wondering. Okay, and so I'm always like following dates and stuff like that, and I talked about in my last video about how I had the 3 supermoons kind of connected to the last 3 months of the year. And then, so I connected January, February, March to October, November, and December. And then I was connecting April, which just had a full moon. It wasn't a super moon. But I connected that to the month of January. And I also made connections to the Messiah, because we saw the full moon on the 19th. And they talk about the full moon being an egg moon, so I was wondering if we were going to see a birthing happen, which we have, but maybe we'll see another birthing. Because I do believe what we saw is a birthing of the peace plan in this month of January. But so what I did was, in my last video, I started charting some of the dates. And you could see, it's kind of neat when you see like how the 2 dates from the 2 months connect. But what I started doing was, I talked about these 2 weeks, because in April was Passover, and there's definitely connections with the Passover pattern in Scripture with the Sukkot pattern. And so I thought that it would be helpful to connect like the second week of Passover, like if there was that same pattern in April with the second week that I came up with in January. And so what I did, I know it's a little confusing what I'm trying to say, was like instead of, because before I was like doing the dates, like April 21st was connecting to January 21st, and and April 23rd would connect to January 23rd. But I switched it for this second week, and started connecting the Hebrew dates with January's dates. So I was connecting Nisan 22 with January 22. And so what I did to make it a little easier for you is I highlighted the colors, and made the colors match. And then what I did was I didn't put this on my slides, but I went back and said, well, what if there is a connection, and we wanted to, if we wanted to, instead of connecting April 21st to January 21st, connecting it to January 15th, which would be like, well, so let me think. Would it work that way? Connecting it to, the first day. Actually, it probably wasn't April 21st. Let me get my April calendar out here. Because, I was saying I wanted to connect that Passover week to this first week. And so really, it started on April 20th was the first day of Passover. And so connecting, okay, so this was the thing. I wanted to bring this up because this connection was really very interesting to me. So I talked about these 2 weeks in January being connected to like Trump's last 2 weeks. And so if you connect the first day of Passover in April to January 15th, what we had on April 20th was that is Hitler's birthday. And so I thought that was definitely a very interesting connection. So I'm kind of wondering if that's given us a picture of maybe what Trump is going to look like. Um, and so I thought that was very interesting. Um, so I was looking to if there's anything else that stood out. So that was that. So then moving into um, but it is kind of interesting because we do have connections to from April 21st, which was Easter. There's definitely connections to January 21st. um and like January 21st is going to be 29 months after the Great American solar eclipse. um and that was when Trump's impeachment trial starts. So definitely very interesting stuff that happened on that date. And then it was 9 months after Easter, after this April 21st. um and then um let's see, and it was also 21 months after the Barbara Bush funeral, which I talked about was significant because Trump wasn't invited, or kind of sort of. He didn't go to that funeral. And then what's interesting too, on January 21st is that's when Trump would be 73 years, 7 months, and 7 days old. Okay, let me check this because yeah, that's correct, because I made a mistake about that. I wanted to make sure that I got that accurate in my slides, and I did. Okay. So definitely a very interesting date. And then okay, so um so for April 27th, that was Nissan 22, and there was a synagogue shooting. And so I connect that to January 22nd, where there was a shooting in Seattle. And then January 22nd was 7 months after the financial plans were released, that 7 month thing that I talked about. And then April 28th, Nissan 23 connects to January 23rd. And so Nissan 23 was Orthodox Easter. That was when we saw that Trump said he was going to release his peace plan by Tuesday, and Pence invited Netanyahu and Gantz to the White House. And then April 30th is Nissan 25, and that connects to January 25th. So on Nissan 25, we saw 25 tornadoes in Oklahoma, Kansas, and Missouri, which is a lot of tornadoes. And it's kind of interesting because, there was 25 tornadoes and it was Nissan 25, so I thought that was kind of interesting. And there was flooding also in Iowa, and hail too. We saw hail on that day. So on January 25th, that was when we saw the Palestinians calling for mass protests to the deal of the century rollout. And then it was also, we saw 2 weeks, it was kind of the end of 2 weeks of incendiary balloons coming from Gaza. So it's definitely some significant stuff going on. And so we want to pay attention to that. And then May 1st was Nissan 26. And so what happened on that day was when Peter Mayhew of Star Wars died. He's the one who played Chewbacca. And then, so that connects to the Kobe Bryant helicopter crash. So definitely interesting. And then May 2nd was Nissan 27. And that was Yom HaShoah, which is, like the Jewish people have their own date of when they, kind of fast and pray for the Holocaust. And that's on Nissan 27. And so that is very interesting that this connects to January 27th, because January 27th is International Holocaust Remembrance Day. Um, so that's why, I definitely paid attention to this pattern, because it seemed to work. There's a couple dates that work really well. And then also on January 27th was when Gantz and Netanyahu met with Trump, separately, not together. Okay. So then on this slide, let's see. So May 3rd is Nissan 28. And that was when there was 150 rockets shot at Israel, which was just terrible. And then a 737 crash landed in Florida on that day. No one was hurt. I mean, they landed. I mean, they still survived pretty well. And then there was 4 animals that died in that crash landing. But other than that, the people were okay. And then there was a meteorite shower for 3 days starting on the 28th. So the 28th, 29th, 30th. So that connects to January 28th, which was the deal of the century release. Netanyahu, is like formally going to face an indictment trial. It was the last day of Trump's defense in his trial, and then we saw a 7.7 earthquake happen on that day. So definitely a very big day, prophetically speaking. So that 737 crash landing, connects to Trump being okay. So the day of his release of the deal of the century, he is 73 years old, 7 months, and I think it's 14 days on that day. So definitely very interesting. And then and it's kind of interesting too, because it's like day 14 of the 2 weeks. So definitely interesting. And then let's see. So the next date would be Nissan 30, which was May 5th. Oh, no, wait, I skipped a day. May 4th is Nissan 29, which was the start of 850 rockets that were shot at Israel over 2-day periods, so on the 29th and the 30th. So it's just terrible. And that was the Kentucky Derby. It was kind of interesting because Maximum Security, the name of the horse, was disqualified in the Kentucky Derby. So I thought that was very interesting. And if you kind of connected to like peace and safety, peace and security with the peace plan, it's kind of interesting that it would connect to the day after the release of the peace plan. And then it's also Star Wars Day, because you know how they go, may the force be with you, may the 4th, so they call that Star Wars Day. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And so what was interesting is that it connects to January 29th, which the Palestinians made it a day of rage. And I haven't had a chance to check the news yet to see if anything really significant happened, or if it was a quieter day of rage. I'm not really sure. And then so May 5th is Nissan 30th, and that's when Netanyahu ordered massive strikes, kind of because they were getting so many rockets bombed at them, so that connects to January 30th, which to me is an interesting day because it's 1290 days after 7/19/16. So we see that 1290, which is talked about in Daniel, where like the abomination that causes desolation is set up at 1290. what's also interesting is Netanyahu's planning to meet with Putin. Hopefully, that one hostage will be set free from Russia, the Jewish girl. And then, okay, so then May 6th, which is Ayar 1, very interesting. That was when the royal baby was born in England. Okay. And it's been interesting because we've been hearing about the royals. You know, they, you know, let's see if I find this. On the 18th, you know, it was kind of like they're out. They're no longer royals, you know, on the 18th, you know. Um, um, you know, so just kind of interesting that this is happening during this time frame. And so if you connect that to January 31st, what also happened on Nayar 1 was that was a ceasefire in Israel, which was good. And so on January 31st, I'm kind of keeping an eye on that date because it's 24th day after the Soleimani funeral. Trump is 73 years, 7 months, 17 days on that day. It's 9 months, 17 days after the Notre Dame fire, which I've just mentioned. And then it's the 8th day of this 5th Hanukkah. So definitely a very interesting day to see what's going to happen. And then, let's see. So then February 1st would be connected to Ayar 2. I guess I didn't highlight this. Oh, because I didn't have anything in February 1st. But in May, on May 7th, we saw flooding in Houston, and it was like almost as bad as that hurricane that did all that damage there. And then that was the 1 year anniversary of Barbara Bush's death. And then we see a connection with Ayar 3 May 8th to Super Bowl. And now this is another very interesting date to me for me because that was when the royal baby was presented. And what we see on February 2nd, it's Candlemas, which in America we, you know, kind of call it Groundhog Day, and we've kind of lost the tradition in Candlemas. But Candlemas was the day that they, you know, celebrated the presentation of Jesus in the temple. And so very interesting that there's a connection to the royal baby being presented. So that's interesting. And then it's Super Bowl, what is that, 54? And then, so what the other things that happened on Nayar 3 was it was Yom HaZikaron, and then it's the 74th VE day. And then it was 1 year after Trump canceled his Iran deal. There was an Arkansas tornado where the roof was blown off. I think that's Arkansas. Yeah. And then we have May 9th was Yom Hatzamut. I don't know how to say that. And then there was 2 North Korean missiles shot off on that day. You know, they're practicing or whatever. And then, or test, their missile test. And then Iran had missiles directed at Israel on that day. Kind of interesting. And then the UN Security Council on that day had 700 resolutions against Israel on that day. So, not a good day. So that all connects to February 3rd. Okay. So then I mentioned about how we were seeing a lot of 21 showing up in January. So we wanted to focus on 2 Bay Shabbat. And so, but I got to thinking it was kind of interesting because you have both the Gregorian anniversary of 2 B Shabbat, and then you have the Hebrew date of Tu Shabbat, which, this is the new year for trees. And so January 21st is 1 year after the Tu Shabbat on the Gregorian calendar. And so I'm seeing a pattern which was kind of interesting. If you add 10 days, that takes us to January 30th. And then you have January 31st is kind of in the middle. And then there's 10 more days leads us to February 10th, which is, this holiday on the Hebrew calendar. So that's like another reason why this January 31st is kind of standing out. It's in the middle. We always want to pay attention to stuff in the middle because I think Jesus is in the middle. He was on in the middle on the cross. He shows up in the middle. So anyways, so these are the verses where we could see a connection to New Year for trees. Where God tells Abraham that, a year from now you're going to have a son. So that's why I wanted to pay attention to the New Year for trees this year because, what if this is the year where God promised that, we would have a son, we would see the Messiah. And the other thing that was interesting too was I saw a connection. There was 3 men that came to Abraham, and I thought that was very interesting because there was a connection to 3 Kings Day in January, and that happened on January 6th, I think. Yes, is when it shows up on the calendar. But what was really interesting is that you can almost see kind of this connection with 3 Kings to the peace plan because you have President Trump, you have Prime Minister Netanyahu, and then you had Benny Gantz as another potential prime minister, all kind of being there for the release of this peace plan. Even though Benny Gantz wasn't there on the actual day, he was there the day before, and talked to President Trump about the peace plan. So we see kind of these 3 kings, and I really think if you read the story about the 3 kings, I think it could be a prophetical shadow about the release of the peace plan because you have the 3 kings bringing gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And I think frankincense could connect to Trump, because in the most holy place, there was the table that had the loaves of bread and the 2 loaves of 6. You were supposed to put frankincense on both of the 6 rows of 6. So that could connect to Trump because it's a connection to the 666 and the connection to the bread. And then gold would be kind of a connection to Netanyahu because he's the prime minister of Israel, who Israel is the gold, the Christians are the silver. And then myrrh could be connected to Benny Gantz. We see myrrh, like I'd like to, think about this some more, but myrrh, kind of connects to like a funeral. It's a funeral spice. I mean, frankincense could be a funeral spice too. So, okay, so that's that day. And then, I talked about, I already mentioned this, but talked about how April was the egg moon, were we going to see a birthing? And then we definitely saw the birthing of the peace plan. And so, what I have here is the verses where we read about time, times, and half a time. And so I had a new thought. I mean, I did connect like the time, times, and half a time to these, 3.5 months, like would lead us to the middle of January, and then you start the 2 weeks. But then I was kind of wondering too if you could take these time times and half a time and connect it to where like time would be the time of the 1260 days, the time of 666. And then times would be the last 2 weeks, and that would connect to the 62 numbers too, where 6 would be the time and then 2 would be the times. And then it talks about half a time, which is 3 more days. And so that's another reason why we want to keep an eye on January 31st, because it's 3 days after the 28th. And then I thought it was interesting. Like, I looked at this verse, and then after seeing the peace plan, it says, he will speak out against the Most High and wear down the saints of the Highest One, and he will intend to make alterations in times and in law. And they will be given into his hands for a time, time, and half a time. And so I thought it was interesting because I've always looked at this verse and, figured it was talking about the Antichrist. But then I'm like, well, you could really connect this to Trump too. And so like another fulfillment of this verse, because with the deal of the century, we are seeing alterations in laws. With kind of there's already been kind of like peace plans or treaties or something set up with some of the different nations, and then kind of like certain laws signed, um, connecting to, I don't know which of the territories, but like the West Bank or something like that. The settlements, I guess is what they call them. They made, like they made, some kind of treaty or something with, what is that one country? Oh, um, oh, I can't think of the name of the country now. But one of the countries on their border, and so what you have is this deal of the century is kind of like, coming against, these predetermined, um, you know, treaties, and you just don't really want to do that. You don't really want to cut down things that are working. You don't want to cut them down. Um, and so that was kind of interesting. Um, and then it was interesting too. Okay, so it says in Daniel 12:7, it says, and swore by him who lives forever that it would be for a time, times, and half a time. And as soon as they finish shattering the power of the holy people, all these will be completed. Okay, well, so what I'm wondering is if what we're going to really see out of this quote unquote peace plan is instead of peace, because I don't really think it's a true peace, we're going to see the holy people shattered. Okay. Um, so that verse is interesting. Um, and then it's interesting that the woman flies into the wilderness, um, from the presence of the serpent. Okay, so kind of interesting, um, like, protecting her from the serpent. I could see like a picture of, like God's people being protected, in, they're not following the serpent, where in this case, the serpent could be a picture of Trump. So kind of interesting. Okay, so then, we see in Daniel, there's a 3-week time frame where he's mourning. And then we see Gabriel talks about fighting with the Prince of Persia for 21 days. Okay, so I wanted to mention that January 28th was 21 days after the Soleimani funeral. so the 3 weeks with Daniel, I've already connected that to the morning would be during the time of the 666. And then Daniel sees the messianic figure on the 24th. Okay. So are we going to see the Messiah show up on January 31st? Because that would be, if the 28th is considered the 21, because it's the 21st day after the Salamani funeral. Or if you wanted to be happier, you could say it's 21 days after the Orthodox Christmas. Then January 31st would be 24 days after the Orthodox Christmas, or after the Salamani funeral. And so will we see Messiah show up on January 31st or some other third day? I mean, we definitely see a pattern, but we don't know in scripture that, it's like, 21 and 24 show up and are significant, and the 24th is definitely a very significant date. you know, um, and so, but we don't know completely how it's going to be fulfilled. But I did think it was kind of interesting that it talked about Gabriel fighting with the Prince of Persia for 21 days, and that, so we had like these 21 days from the Salamani funeral to January 28th. And so, what is that, a 3-week time frame? So like, definitely interesting to think about. And there's another verse that I talk about later in the slides that I think kind of connect with this Gabriel fighting with the Prince of Persia for 21 days, because I think the Prince of Persia could be Trump. So kind of interesting. Okay, so then I talked about how, in my last video, I talked about how we see a bunch of 3 days followed by 3 days and then followed by a third day. Okay, so we saw that in Esther where she says, let the Jews fast for 3 days, night or day, and then Esther and her maidens are going to fast in the same way. And then Esther goes to the king on the third day. And then we see this repeated pattern in Genesis where there's 2 in prison with Joseph, and there's 3 days, and the third day is Pharaoh's birthday. And then I was reminded of, by Steve Fletcher, he talked about the sign of Jonah, and oops, I forgot about the sign of Jonah, and so I'm glad he reminded me about that. And so let's read this verse here. So it says, Matthew 12:38-40. It says, Then some of the scribes and Pharisees said to him, Teacher, we want to see a sign from you. But he answered and said to them, An evil and adulterous generation craves for a sign, and yet no sign will be given to it but the sign of Jonah the prophet. For just as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the sea monster, so will the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. Okay, so what I did was I took this verse and I said, what if Jonah is Iran? Okay, in the beginning of this verse, where the first 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the sea monster connect to Iran. Okay, and because what we had at the beginning of the month was we had the Iranians, the Arab people had like 3 days of mourning, and then they had, and I don't remember why they were doing it at the beginning of the year, like the first, second, and third. But then when Soleimani got killed, then they mourned. They had 3 days of mourning on the 4th, 5th, and 6th, and then on the 7th was the funeral, and then 3 days after the funeral was January 10th, which was where we saw Soleimani's daughter, asking the Iranian leaders to avenge her father's death. And so what I did was I connected the sea monster to Trump because I found this verse where it says, Son of man, take up a lamentation over Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and say to him, you compared yourself to a young lion of the nations, yet you are like the monster in the seas, and you burst forth in your rivers and muddy the waters with your feet and fouled their rivers. So what I highlighted young lions of the nations because what we could see with Trump is that he's comparing himself to a young lion of the nations. Okay, so we know that the lion is a picture of, the lion from the tribe of Judah. And so to compare himself to a young lion, it's like he's making himself out to be a messianic type figure. But then God says about him, you are like the monster in the seas. Okay. And so it's kind of like he swallowed up Iran, when they were in his belly, in the belly of the sea monster for these 3 days and 3 nights. And they weren't very happy about it. Until they were spit up on the dry land by the sea monster, Jonah. And then, so what we see is, okay, so the second part of the verse, it talks about the Son of Man is going to be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. Okay. And so, if the earth is America, or like a picture of the people that follow Obama, we have Trump being the Son of Man that I put in quotes, this guy that's acting like the Son of Man, is 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. And so 3 days is when the Democrats make their case in the trial, and then 3 days is, Trump's defense, which leads us to the 28th. And then the third day is January 31st. So we see this pattern. And I think we might see a repeat of this pattern with the true Son of Man. So that remains to be seen. Okay, so I talked about John 7, where we had verse 2 connects to the Feast of Booths that we saw in October. Verse 10 connects to like kind of the secret feast in November. And then verses 14-19 talks about Jesus going to the temple to teach. Why do you seek to kill me? That's connected to the month of December. I talked about this in my last video. But I had talked about that verse 37, maybe that was a connection to the Messiah, because it says the last day, the great day. Jesus says, if anyone is thirsty. But then when I started kind of thinking about the deal of the century and connecting these verses, I'm wondering if this last day, the great day, I put in quotes like great, is connected to January 28th. Like it'd be kind of like the infamous day of January 28th. The day when Trump released the peace plan. Like I said, he was 73 years, 7 months, 14 days. So the 73 years and 7 months connects to this John 7:37. And then, but I do mention we could have two fulfillments, that we do have maybe have the true, Son of Man showing up on the last day. Could be January 31st, where Trump is 73 years, 7 months, 17 days. Because what happens in the verses, in verse 39, it talks about Jesus was not yet glorified. So like we had this last great day, but it was before Jesus was glorified. And then let's read on. So I wanted to read these verses in John 7, because when I read them, see if you could see a connection to President Trump. So it says, some of the people, therefore, when they heard these words, were saying, this certainly is the prophet. Others were saying, this is the Christ. Still others were saying, surely the Christ is not going to come from Galilee, is he? Has not the scripture said that the Christ comes from the descendants of David and from Bethlehem, the village where David was? So a division occurred in the crowd because of him. Some of them wanted to seize him, but no one laid hands on him. So we see a connection to, kind of this messianic figure that's, came out of Galilee, you know, um, but not, you know, um, but not from like Bethlehem, which would be like a city of Judah. Um, so kind of interesting. That could apply to, President Trump, who looks like a messianic figure, but he's a Gentile. He's not Jewish. Um, so kind of interesting. And then it goes on to say, so a division occurred in the crowd because of them. Some of them wanted to seize them, but no one laid hands on him. Okay, do we not see a big divide happening in the country because of President Trump? We do. And then, so then if we read on in John 7:50 to 53, it says, Nicodemus, the one who came to him before, being one of them, said to them, our law does not judge a man unless it first hears from him and knows what he is doing, does it? They answered him, you are not also from Galilee, are you? Search and see that no prophet arises out of Galilee. Okay, so Nicodemus here is like talking about, obviously this discussion of is he the prophet, is he not the prophet? But what's interesting is that you could kind of connect it to President Trump's trial, because we kind of have this big debate going on now about, like, should we have witnesses? Should we not have witnesses? So we could see maybe a connection there. And then it talks about everyone went to his home. And that phrase also shows up after the 3 months of Mary being with Elizabeth. Then she goes to her home. And so maybe like, but I kind of think it's a picture of where everyone kind of goes to their corners. And so we got Obama's people going to their corners. We got President Trump's people going to their corners. And then we have the people that follow the true Messiah, Jesus, going to their corner. And then if Jesus shows up, then they go to their true home. And then what's interesting in John 8, so we do kind of see, kind of like resurrection pictures in John 8. And then it also starts with the story of the woman caught in adultery, so I could see maybe Jesus showing up, and then, the Democrats going to Jesus going, hey, here's Trump, and, we caught him, doing this stuff with Ukraine, and then Jesus is going to say, well, he was without sin, cast the first stone, and then everybody would go home. So definitely kind of interesting. And then I talked too about where this Jehoiakim, king of Judah, lets gets released on the 27th day of the month. And so I wondered if the 37th year connects to the 73rd year of Trump. And then we're looking for a 27 day. And so I was kind of wondering if January 31st, like at first I was just going to erase this verse because I couldn't find it fitting into my current timeline that I'm looking at, my current watch dates. But then I realized that, January, okay, so if January 31st is a 24, it's 24 days after the funeral or 24 days after the Orthodox Christmas, then 27 would be February 3rd, which is kind of when I'm wondering if that's when Jesus is going to resurrect the Jewish people after getting killed. Like I'm wondering if we're going to see stuff the night of the 30th. You know, because I think Jesus shows up the same time that Israel gets attacked. You know, like the big, the great flood where the fountains of the deep burst open and the fountains of the heavens burst open. Um, you know, so definitely a big shaking. And then, you know, so then, you know, I talked about Jesus' trial being a picture of Trump's impeachment, and then the next step is Jesus' crucifixion, which could be a picture of Israel being attacked, which would be a fulfillment of Psalm 83, and then Jesus' resurrection on the third day, and then other resurrections in order. So we'd see Jesus resurrected on the 31st, and then the Jewish people resurrected on February 3rd, and then following that sometime the Christians. And then, so talking about 1290 days, January 28th, you know, so obviously when something big happens, like the peace plan being released, then we got to get our calculators out. And, you know, so I told my husband that I felt like I was, you know, a GPS thing because, you know, like you kind of make a wrong turn and then it's like recalculating. And, you know, so when some of my watch dates don't turn out like I think, then I'm like recalculating. So anyways, so I was recalculating because now that we have the release of the peace plan, we could see if there's a 1290 days that connects to that day. And so I got 7/17/2016 was when Trump and Pence were side by side for the first time on 60 Minutes interview on TV. So I think that was the Sunday night. And, you know, so I highlighted the 6. So I thought that was kind of interesting of 60 Minutes. And then we also have another 1290 days on January 30th because that's 1290 days after 7/19/2016, which was when Trump became the official nominee. So we're definitely in the season of 1290 days. So definitely very interesting. I talked about Hanukkah being a picture of decreasing light and also a picture of increasing light. And so Trump would be decreasing in light and Messiah would be increasing in light. Because, you know, John says he must increase and I must decrease. And so I really think this kind of relates to this release of the deal of the century. I think this could be the fullness of the Gentiles, like the fullness of the Gentile sin of what happened with the release of this peace plan. And later on, I'll talk about how like Trump has decreased light, like has filled up the cup of the cup of wrath with his actions, with this peace, quote unquote, peace plan. Okay, so, but let's get to some scripture here. And so I'm going to do Esther again because I love that book. It's definitely like a lot easier to see scripture being fulfilled in that story. I mean, I guess because I know it really well. So it starts out in Esther 1. We see an 180-day banquet, and so I connect that to the time of the 666 of Trump. And then it's followed by a 1-week banquet. So I'm wondering if, you know, Trump's trial, his covenant with many, is the 1 week. And it talks about during this 1-week banquet that there's drinking plentifully. You know, so like drinking plentifully would be like people getting drunk. It's also could be a picture of like if the Americans are the wine, you know, people getting drunk are making a mess of the American political system. And then what we saw is that Queen Vashti also gave a banquet in the king's palace. And, you know, so I could see that, like, this other banquet, if you can, you know, like, you have Trump's trial, being a picture of this banquet with people drinking plentifully, making a mess of the American political system. At the same time, we're seeing people in Israel making a mess of the Israeli political system. And, a part of that is we have had these indictment charges against Netanyahu. And kind of interesting that that became official on the 28th of this month. Formal. It became, they formally indicted him, which means he's going to go to trial. And then in Esther 1, it talks about on the seventh day, Queen Vashti, the king asked Queen Vashti to come, but she didn't want to come. And so I'm wondering if that's a picture of, we've already seen another fulfillment of this, but I'm wondering if this is, I always think of multiple fulfillments with prophecy because I think it's just a really rich word, that God has put in it. And so what we saw was the Palestinians did not come to the peace deal rollout. And it's interesting because the peace deal rollout happened on the seventh day. I talked about it's the seventh day of the second week, with the 22nd to the 28th. So definitely very interesting. And then it talks about the king becoming very angry. Well, so after the peace rollout, I think we have like one person who's getting really angry is the Iranian guy. Okay, they're already pretty upset in Iran because of the death of Soleimani, and now we've had the release of this peace deal. And so I just think this anger is just at the tipping point. And then if Iran's getting angry, then obviously God's going to get angry that President Trump has caused Israel's enemies to get angry enough that they're willing to retaliate. And so, the king could be a picture of both the Iranian leader and, God. Two different people that are angry. And then it goes on and talks about how Vashti may no longer come into the presence of the king. Like that was kind of what they decided to do with her. And so I think what that's a picture of is how it's going to be decided about Trump that he can no longer do stuff for Israel. He'll no longer be allowed to have power over Israel, to make decisions, and do things like the deal of the century. Okay, so then I skipped Esther 2, but we'll talk about Esther 3. So then after these events, okay, so it's interesting because like so many people fit into this chapter about Haman. There's so many Hamans in the world and they all fit, because I think, I first did this talking about Erdogan because it fit really well with him. But what's interesting is that now I kind of like, what if we consider Trump to be a Haman type figure? And let's see if it works for him. And it actually works really well. So in Esther 3, it says, after these events, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, and advanced him and established his authority over all the princes who were with him. Okay, so what if that's a picture of Netanyahu promoting Trump? Which, he's done a lot. He even named a whole town after him in Israel. Okay, and then Esther 3:2 says, all the king's servants who were at the king's gate bowed down and paid homage to Haman, for so the king had commanded concerning him. But Mordecai neither bowed down nor paid homage. Okay. So Mordecai could be the Palestinians. They weren't willing to bow down. It could also be a picture of the Iranian leader who didn't bow down. It also, I didn't add this in here, but it also could be a picture of the Democrats, So then it goes on to say, in verse 5, it says, when Haman saw that Mordecai neither bowed down nor paid homage to him, Haman was filled with rage. But he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had told him who the people of Mordecai were. Therefore Haman sought to destroy all the Jews, the people of Mordecai, who were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus. Okay, so one of the things when you're trying to look at prophecy, remember that all the characters could switch. The fulfillment, Haman in one verse could be Trump, and then in a second verse he could be, like in this verse in Esther 3, I think now he's the Iranian leader. He's a picture of the Iranian leader. So it's shifting, so it makes it kind of complicated. But what we see in these verses is that if we have Haman getting mad that Mordecai, okay, so if Haman is the Iranian guy and Mordecai is Trump, we have the Iranian guy getting mad that Trump doesn't bow down or pay homage to him, because he really doesn't, because how Trump is like constantly, putting sanctions on Iran, and just really doing things to make this guy mad, and so then it talks about Haman being filled with rage. Okay, the Iranian guy is definitely filled with rage. And then it talks about like he doesn't want to just, so it says he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone. And so one thing that I mentioned was that like he doesn't really want to go to war with America because it could be kind of dangerous. But what we see here is this picture of like and I've seen this, and they actually made this comment. The Iranian leader, I don't know if it was leader itself or one of the other Iranian leaders, where they said that they're going to attack Israel to get back at Trump. So that was actually said by someone from Iran. So we see that in these verses. And then in Esther 3:7, it says, in the first month, which is the month Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, that is the lot, was cast before Haman from day to day and from month to month until the 12th month, that is the month of Adar. So what we see in this verse is, okay, so what's happening in the story is that Pur, which is the lot, is being cast, kind of like rolling dices. And it's happening over a 12-month period. And so what's interesting is like when you kind of think about the 12th month being 6/6, we see a connection to like the 666. And so what I wrote here is that the Pur being cast before Haman is a picture of Trump doing 666 and the deal of the century before the Iranian leader. And so we see the same concept listed in Revelation 13, where it's talking about the beast, that, like the third beast that I believe connects to Trump, the beast that's actually connected to the 666. It talks about how he's making signs before the beast. Here, let me get it out and see if I can read it and make more sense here. So it says, let's see. Okay. Okay, I saw another beast coming up out of the earth. That's verse 11. And he had two horns like a lamb, and he spoke as a dragon, and he exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence. And he makes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast, whose fatal wound was healed. He performs great signs, so that he even makes fire come down out of heaven to the earth in the presence of men. And he deceives those who dwell on the earth because of the signs which it was given him to perform in the presence of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast who had the wound of the sword and has come to life. Okay, so this is the verse in verse 14 where it says, because of the signs which it was given him to perform in the presence of the beast. And so what we're seeing is that Trump is, so what I think is the signs, his great signs that he's doing is the 666 thing. and he's doing it in the presence of the Iranian leader, which is causing this Iranian leader to get mad. So we see that kind of showing up in both this Esther story and in Revelation. Okay, so then on to Esther 3:8. Then Haman said to King Ahasuerus, there is a certain people scattered and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from those of all other people, and they do not observe the king's law. So it is not in the king's interest to let him remain. If it is pleasing to the king, let it be decreed that they be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who carry on the king's business, to put into the king's treasuries. Then the king took his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. The king said to Haman, the silver is yours, and the people also, to do with them as you please. Okay, so I think these verses are a picture of the deal of the century, because what we have is 10,000 talents of silver. We actually heard Trump mention that he was going to be willing to pay $50 billion of American money to go toward the deal of the century. And what we also saw in the deal of the century is, it talks about these people having different laws, and they're being different. And so I actually heard that, like Trump's deal of the century, he was going to kind of like pull the Arabs out of Israel and put them into the new Palestinian state. Um, you know, um, which is just, kind of interesting. And, so we see kind of that in here, but I also kind of, this green highlighted thing, let it be decreed that they be destroyed. What I think, so obviously Trump's not saying that these Arab people are going to be destroyed, but, he does talk about like moving them out of the state of Israel. And then, but what I think what we see is probably the shadow of, this deal that Haman's trying to make with King Ahasuerus is a picture of the deal of a century, which is a deal that claims to be about peace, but will end up getting the Jewish people killed. So that's kind of what I think is going on here. And so the king here is Netanyahu, Haman is Trump. So then moving on to Esther 3:12. And it's interesting that it's silver because silver connects to the Christians. Okay, so Esther 3:12. Then the king's scribes were summoned on the 13th day of the first month, and it was written just as Haman commanded, to the king's satraps, to the governors who were over each province, and to the princes of each province according to its script, each people according to its language, being written in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed with the king's signet ring. Okay, so what was interesting is that Trump met with Gantz and Netanyahu on January 27th, which would be the 13th day of the 2 weeks. So that was kind of interesting. And then in Esther 3:13 it says, letters were sent by couriers to all the king's provinces to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate all the Jews, both young and old, women and children, in one day, the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and to seize their possessions as plunder. A copy of the edict to be issued as law in every province was published to all the people so that they should be ready for this day. The couriers went out impelled by the king's command while the decree was issued at the citadel in Susa, and while the king and Haman sat down to drink, the city of Susa was in confusion. Okay. So what I'm wondering is January 27th, which is the 13th day of the 2 weeks. A possible fulfillment was that day because that was when we saw ISIS was calling for attacks on Israel due to the upcoming peace deal release. Well, what's interesting is up to this point, ISIS hasn't really bothered attacking Israel. They've been, kind of more attacking Americans and Iraqians and other people. So that was kind of interesting. But and I'm wondering too if what we're seeing too. Oh, and also that day, the 13th day was when Trump was 73 years, 7 months, and 13 days old. And so, and it talks about the city of Susa being in confusion. And so, what we have is the militant Arabs are not happy. And so, they called for a day of rage, they called for rioting, you know, um, so while this deal of the century was happening, um, the city of Susa, or like the Arabs, the militant Arabs are in confusion, or, just not happy. Um, so then going on to Esther 4, when Mordecai learned all that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the midst of the city and wailed loudly and bitterly. He went as far as the king's gate, for no one was to enter the king's gate clothed in sackcloth. Okay, so what if Mordecai here is a picture of the Arabs, or the, because we had like the Palestinians called for a day of rage on the border on January 29th, you know. Um, um, and then it says, verse 3, in each and every province where the command and decree of the king came, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing, and many lay on sackcloth and ashes. So then I said this could be some Jewish people are not happy about, there's some people that absolutely love and think Trump is a genius for coming up with this deal of the century, but then there's other people that are more realistic who are not very happy about this. And then, so this could be some of the Jewish people, mourning. But then we also got Mordecai could be a picture of Netanyahu, who got the cup put in his sack. Okay, so that's kind of a reference to, in the story of Joseph, Joseph's cup gets put into Benjamin's sack. And so this works really well because, then it's like Benjamin's in trouble because he's got this cup in his sack. And, so I think what kind of what happened is, so it talks about Mordecai putting on sackcloth, so like a picture of him having this cup of wrath in his sack. And we saw this happen where he, um, like he's already, um, getting the judgment of God. Like that day, judgment started because then, he was formally indicted on that day. So definitely very interesting. And then, okay, so then it goes on, Esther 4:4. Then Esther's maidens and her eunuchs came and told her, and the queen writhed in great anguish. And she sent garments to clothe Mordecai that he might remove his sackcloth from him, but he did not accept them. Okay, so I'm not totally sure, the fulfillment of this, but maybe it remains to be seen, because I think, this could get fulfilled after we see the Jewish people get attacked. Then we're going to see, like if the maidens are a picture of the Christians in America, then we're going to see him writhe in great anguish if something happens to the Jewish people in Israel. And then it talks about sending garments to clothe Mordecai. I think there's a story of, like the women went to Jesus's grave, to anoint his body, and stuff like that. That could be a picture of that. And then, well, what's interesting, it says, but he did not accept. When we read in Revelation 11 with the two witnesses, um, like they kind of can't bury the bodies, and so I kind of think there could be nuclear stuff that happens in the attack on Israel, and so maybe they, America wants to go, cover their bodies, but they can't because of the radiation or something. We'll see what happens. Then Esther summoned Hatak from the king's eunuchs, whom the king had appointed to attend her, and ordered him to go to Mordecai to learn what this was and why it was. So Hatak went out to Mordecai to the city square in front of the king's gate. Mordecai told him all that had happened to him and the exact amount of money that Haman had promised to pay to the king's treasuries for the destruction of the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the text of the edict which had been issued in Susa for their destruction, that he might show Esther an informer and to order her to go into the king to employ his favor and to plead with him for her people. Hatak came back and related Mordecai's words to Esther. So not totally sure about the fulfillment of this. I do know the exact amount of money that Haman promised to pay into the king's treasuries. Donald Trump promised that he would give $50 billion for the Palestinian state as part of the steal of the century. American taxpayer dollars at work. So I know that. So, I think we still kind of have to wait to see how this gets fulfilled. And then, there could be, Mordecai could be a messianic, a picture of the Messiah here, someone who shows up and talks about the truth about Donald Trump's deal of the century. Although there are some people writing about it too, though. So, then Esther spoke to Hatak and ordered him to reply to Mordecai. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that for any man or woman who comes to the king to the inner court who is not summoned, he has but one law, that he be put to death, unless the king holds out to him the golden scepter so that he may live. And I have not been summoned to come to the king for these 30 days. They related Esther's words to Mordecai. Then Mordecai told him to reply to Esther, do not imagine that you in the king's palace can escape any more than all the Jews. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, and you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not attained royalty for such a time as this. So I think kind of what we have is Esther is kind of speaking, like telling us how God's law works, and so if you go to the inner court without being summoned by God, you will be put to death. Okay. And so that's what we saw with Trump was standing on holy ground when he was doing the stuff, making these proclamations about Israel, because he was not summoned by God to do that. And so then, so what God says, if you curse Israel, you'll be cursed. And so he must be put to death because of what he did. And then Mordecai tells Esther, don't imagine that you're going to escape. If you remain silent, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place, and you and your father's house will perish. And so, I think what the deal is that what we want to do is, because we see a picture of Esther like appealing to the king for the lives of her people, and so I think what we want to be doing is praying to God. And then, so I talk about 30 days being 666, the 3 times that, Trump was not summoned to go into the inner court. Okay. And then Esther 15. So then Esther says, "Go assemble all the Jews who are found in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maidens will also fast in the same way, and thus I will go to the king, which is not according to law, and if I perish, I perish." So Mordecai went away and did just as Esther has commanded him. So it talks about fasting for 3 days and 3 nights. I already talked about a fulfillment of that with, we've already seen two fulfillments, with the Arabs mourning when Solomon was killed, 3 days, 3 nights. And then we saw 3 days and 3 nights in the trial of Trump. And then, but are we going to see another fulfillment? Are they now spending 3 days mourning because of the peace plan? Fasting and getting ready to attack, is a possibility. I don't know if they can get ready in 3 days to attack Israel, but we'll see what happens. And then, or maybe they'll invade Israel after 3 days or something like that. And then, okay, so I wanted to bring up these verses from Revelation because they connect to kind of what we're talking about right now. It says, when they have finished their testimony, so this is talking about the two witnesses, the beast that comes up out of the abyss will make war with them and overcome them and kill them. And their dead bodies will lie on the street of the great city, which mystically is called Sodom and Egypt, where also their Lord was crucified. Those from the people and tribes and tongues and nations will look at their dead bodies for 3.5 days, and will not permit their dead bodies to be laid in a tomb. And those who dwell on the earth will rejoice over them and celebrate. And they will send gifts to one another because these two prophets tormented those who dwell on the earth. So I highlighted finish their testimony. Okay, so we have the two witnesses that finished their testimony. And so I think that is a picture of the deal of the century being released on the 28th. That is the end of the testimony of the two witnesses, who are President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu. So then what is the next step according to this verse? The beast that comes out of the abyss will make war with them and overcome them and kill them. Okay. So anyways, so they finished their testament. No, okay, so I already said that. The next step is war. Oh, I already said all that. Okay, and then Esther 5 says, now it came about on the third day that Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace in front of the king's rooms. And the king was sitting on his royal throne in the throne room opposite the entrance to the palace. When the king saw Esther the queen standing in the court, she obtained favor in his sight. And the king extended to Esther the golden scepter which was in her hand, in his hand. So Esther came near and touched the top of the scepter. Okay. So actually, I kind of wonder. One thought was, after reading these verses, okay, I'm going to go back to this slide where it says, Mordecai replied to Esther, do not imagine that you in the king's palace can escape any more than all the Jews, for if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, and you and your father's house will perish, and who knows whether you have not attained royalty for such a time as this. This could be a picture of somebody talking to some militant person, or enemy of, like, Mordecai could be a picture of, like, the Palestinians talking to the Iranian guy, saying, don't think that you're going to escape any more than all the Arabs. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Palestinians or the Arabs from another place, and you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not attained royalty for such a time as this. So it could be a picture of, the Arabs talking about, like, you could get in trouble because of this deal of the century could affect you too, and so you want to get involved militarily. And so then that would connect to the Esther 5:1-2, where, on the third day, Esther put on her royal robes, could be a picture of putting on, like military uniforms. And then it says, stood in the inner court of the king's palace in front of the king's room. And so, a picture of attacking Israel. And the king was sitting on his royal throne in the throne room opposite the entrance to the palace. Okay, that could be a picture of God. And so when the king saw Esther the queen standing in the court, she obtained favor in his sight, and the king extended to Esther the golden scepter. And so what we see is that God is going to give favor to Israel's enemies and allow them to attack Israel. You can only attack Israel when God allows you to. And so, and then it talks about Esther coming near and touching the top of the scepter, the golden scepter. Gold is the Jewish people, So on the third day, God allows Esther, quote unquote, to go in the inner court, and the golden scepter could be Israel. Okay, so that's the Esther story, and it talks about that happening on the third day. So let's talk. I want one of the biggest purposes of this video is I really want people to understand the cup of wrath, and how the deal of the century really ties into all that. And so let's talk about Genesis 40, because this is where we see the story that really talks about it well. And so Genesis 40, okay, so Joseph is one of the 12 sons of Jacob. And he gets thrown in jail. He gets sold into slavery by his brothers, and then he gets thrown into jail. And then while he's in jail, the cupbearer and the baker, they get thrown into jail with him. Okay, and so let's read about that. Okay. Then it came about after these things, the cupbearer and the baker for the king of Egypt offended their lord, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was furious with his two officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. Okay, so when we're reading the story, remember that, okay, so Jesus talks about the bread being his body and the wine being his blood. Okay. And so I have connected in some of my previous videos where the bread is connected to the Jewish people, because that's connected to the body of Christ. And then you have the wine is connected to the Christians, because one connection could be like, how would I say this? Like, like the blood of Christ, where like blood comes out of his side when he's on the cross, and they poke him in the side and blood comes out, and so and we see that the woman comes out of the side, and so we see a connection with the blood of Christ being connected to the woman, coming out of the side. Okay, so then it says, okay, so then what I think is that Trump is the chief cupbearer, so he's in charge of the women, the Americans, the Christians. And then Netanyahu's the baker because he's in charge of the bread. And then what we have is, let's see, the Iran leader could be a picture of the king of Egypt. Like, really, we could kind of have two people listed here, because it says, first of all, they offended their lord, the king of Egypt. And so what if the Iranian leader is the king of Egypt? And then it says Pharaoh was furious with his two officials. so what if God is the Pharaoh? I mean, I'm assuming Pharaoh and the king of Egypt are the same thing. But, we could maybe get two people out of this verse. Um, um, and then, okay, so then Genesis 43. So he put them in confinement in the house of the captain of the bodyguard in the jail, the same place where Joseph was imprisoned. The captain of the bodyguard put Joseph in charge of them, and he took care of them, and they were in confinement for some time. Okay, so what if Joseph here is Obama? And because, right now Obama's in jail, quote unquote, that Netanyahu and Trump are, kind of causing the left to be in jail because they don't have quite the power that they want to run the world, you know. Um, and so then Trump and Netanyahu are in jail and being taken care of, this Joseph figure, and so how we see Netanyahu and Trump being taken care of is that Trump is being impeached and Netanyahu's about to be indicted, so um okay, and so then Genesis 45 it says, then the cupbearer and the baker for the king of Egypt who were confined in jail both had a dream the same night, each man with his dream, each dream with his own interpretation. Okay, so I would like to propose that the dream is a picture of Trump's deal of the century. Because one of the things that I said is that he's dreaming if he thinks he can make peace with the Palestinians. And then the interpretation, so we have both these men kind of, well, I mean, in the story, they have their own dream with their own interpretation, and that actually could be kind of true with even with this deal of the century, that they both kind of have their own ideas of how they like to see it play out. Um, and then the interpretation could be a picture of what their judgment is going to be because of doing this deal of the century. Um, okay, so then so Genesis 46, when Joseph came to them in the morning and observed them, behold, they were dejected. He asked Pharaoh's officials who were with him in confinement in his master's house, why are your houses so sad today? Then they said to him, we have had a dream and there is no one to interpret it. Then Joseph said to them, do not interpretations belong to God? Tell it to me, please. So here, Joseph could be a picture of, um, the messianic figure Jesus, because it talks about Joseph showing up in the morning. And then, um, being connected to God and being able to, um, you know, tell people the interpretations of dreams. Um, so, I mean, there could be another fulfillment that I'm missing, um, but that would be one of them. Okay, so then Genesis 49. So the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph and said to him, in my dream, behold, there was a vine in front of me, and on the vine were 3 branches. And as it was budding, its blossoms came out, and its clusters produced ripe grapes. Now Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, so I took the grapes and squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and I put the cup into Pharaoh's hand. Okay, so what we have is a vine with 3 branches. And so what we have is like the 3 stages of the grapes. First you have the buds, then you have the blossoms, and then the final stage would be the ripe grapes. Okay. So what I'd like to propose is those 3 stages connect to Trump's deal of the century, because the first stage, which would be the buds, was moving the embassy, Trump, making his announcement and moving the embassy to Jerusalem. And then the blossoms would be the announcement about the Golan Heights, and then the ripe grapes would be the announcement about the West Bank. But really, the ripe grapes is the deal of the century, the whole finished plan. Um, you know, um, and then so what we have then is that the cupbearer takes, he has Pharaoh's cup is in his hand, and then he takes the grapes and squeezes them into Pharaoh's cup. So, first of all, he has Pharaoh's cup in his hand. Like we see in the story of Esther, where, like the king gives Haman, like the signet ring, he gives him his power, and so like Pharaoh's cup being in his hand could be that, like Netanyahu has given Trump permission to, like have some power over Israel, you know. And then, when it talks about um the grapes being squeezed into the cup, um, what we see is like these three stages, all kind of like mixing together to make this deal of the century. And and then so we have these grapes, which end up being grapes of wrath squeezed into Pharaoh's cup. Um, and when you hear, like the enemies of Israel talk about this peace plan, they mention these three stages because each of these three stages have gotten them really mad. So we see this mixture of these three, kind of culminating in this deal of the century. And then um, what we have then is, um, so then like this Pharaoh's cup is, so I want to call that like the cup of wrath. Okay. And so like I think there's two different fulfillments, because one, first Pharaoh could be the Iranian leader, and then so see how the deal of the century has been causing Israel's enemies to be angry because they see these three things, and in the culmination with the deal of the century all squished together into this cup, and it's making them mad. And then, but the second fulfillment is that if Pharaoh is God, God's cup of wrath, because of this deal of the century, gets put into Netanyahu's hand. And, so like I said, that we saw that actually even happening on the same day, where he was formally indicted on the same day. But so what happens is really like what we see this picture of is really Trump. The way the world works is that Trump should be suffering the consequences of his actions. Okay. But there's a crossover where Trump's punishment really gets put into Netanyahu's hand. And there's lots of reasons for that. I mean, it has a lot to do with, God's trying to bring the Jewish people and the Gentiles together, so it's partly to fulfill that. It partly has to do with the fact that, the Jewish people are the leaders, and so they suffer judgment first, so, I mean, don't think that Trump's going to get off, um, you know, um, because then after the Jewish people get judged, then, judgment's going to come to Trump. But it also has to do with the fact that, I mean, I think because we're at the end of the Gentiles, it has to do with, I think Jesus is coming to America, and so God is, doesn't want to do anything to America just yet. He wants it to still be here. So, I mean, everyone keeps saying America's going away. It's not going away, at least not until Jesus comes, because he's going to come. He's going to be the Jonah figure where he says, 40 days you'll be overturned. We need Jesus to come and deliver the message of judgment coming. So I think we're going to have Jesus come, and, there's a bunch of stuff that he's going to be doing, and that has to happen in America at the end of the time of the Gentiles. So I think he's going to come and, kind of finish up the time of the Gentiles. Okay, so then Joseph says to the cupbearer, "This is the interpretation of it. The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 more days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office, and you will put Pharaoh's cup into his hand according to your former custom when you were his cupbearer." Okay, so then, I talked about, so this phrase about lifting up your head kind of got me to go to Genesis 3:15, where we got Jacob crossing his hands and putting them on the heads of Ephraim and Manasseh. And so, we see this crossover picture in that story. Um, and, um, and so it's kind of interesting because it says within 3 more days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office. And so remember, you know, President Trump should be suffering judgment, but within 3 more days, God is going to lift up his head and restore him to his office. And like I said, I think it has a lot to do with the fact that because President Trump, I think, is going to be the Pharaoh to Joseph, and where Joseph is the messianic figure is Jesus, that President Trump has to be around so that Jesus could come, you know, I mean, there's a whole interaction thing going on there. Um, so he's going to be restored to his office, just for a season, so that Jesus could come, and Jesus could fulfill his week, and then Trump will suffer judgment under Obama's hand. Um, and then also we see this picture with the cupbearer restored to the office could also be um, Obama and the Messiah, Jesus. And then, because, I do think we see Obama kind of returning the same time that Jesus returns. And then, you know, this cupbearer puts Pharaoh's cup into his hand. Could be a picture of God using Obama to deliver his wrath to Trump. And then it says, according to your former custom, so we see Obama returning to be like Obama, returning to do like the stuff that he did before when he was president. We see Messiah returning to be like the Messiah, to be like Jesus, doing the stuff that he did before, Okay, so then Joseph goes on to say, "Only keep me in mind when it goes well with you, and please do me a kindness by mentioning me to Pharaoh and get me out of this house. For I was in fact kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing that they should have put me into the dungeon." Okay, so the cupbearer is supposed to keep Joseph in mind by mentioning to Pharaoh. So that could be another picture of where we need to pray. As Christians, we should be mentioning the Jewish people to God. But also, because if Joseph is a picture of Israel or Judah, what we have is that, he says, "For I was in fact kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews." The word actually could mean stolen, so stolen from the land of the Hebrews. So that could be a picture of, the Jewish people sent into exile out of the land. And then it says, "Even here I've done nothing." So even here I've done nothing could be a picture of, in the land of Israel, because the nation of Israel gets a lot of persecution. And so we see this picture of, even here in the land I've done nothing, but I'm still getting persecuted by the nations, because they like to be accused of, people like to accuse Israel of, persecuting the Palestinians, and just a lot of things. So we see a picture of persecution when they don't deserve persecution. Not to say they don't deserve judgment, because there are things that happen in Israel that still deserve judgment. But then it says, get me out of this house, and so we want to get Joseph or Judah out of the house of judgment. Um, you know, I mean, we could kind of be seeing maybe some picture of, when it says, get me out of this house, like they want to get out of the house of judgment and then into the house with Jesus, where there's, our judgment is covered by Jesus's works. And then when the chief baker saw that he interpreted favorably, he said to Joseph, I also saw in my dream, and behold, there were 3 baskets of white bread on my head. And in the top basket there were some of all sorts of baked food for Pharaoh, and the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head. Okay, so it says, like, interpreted favorably could be a picture of Netanyahu is caught on the Trump train because things seem so favorable with the 3 things that Trump did, like Trump, because I think, how God allows kind of like a diluting influence. I think that happened to Netanyahu because he's kind of deluded about Trump. He's seen the things that Trump has been doing as favorable to Israel, but I don't think they're all that favorable. And then, so what we see is there's 3 baskets on the chief baker's head. And so that could be a picture of Netanyahu with the mark of the beast on his head. The bread was baked. Okay, so heat and anger, or heat, which is a picture of anger, is being applied to the bread. Like we see a picture of Israel's persecution, which we've seen that kind of growing with the 666, how there's been a lot more rioting from the Gaza Strip, connected to, ever since starting from, I mean, the consistent Friday protest, started when the embassy was moved to Jerusalem. So we see that. And then what we end up seeing is the birds eating out of the top basket. So kind of like, now that the deal of the century is completed, the birds are going to come to attack Israel. We're going to see kind of the final culmination of, the persecution and because of this deal of the century. So, like one of the birds that would come to attack would be the raven, which I think is a picture of Turkey. But there's other birds and stuff like that. So, anyways, okay, so then going on to Genesis 40:18, it says, Then Joseph answered and said, This is its interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 more days, Pharaoh will lift up your head from you and will hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat your flesh off of you. Okay. So I talked about 3 days being 666, but, I'm also wondering about the 3rd day after, the release of the deal of the century. We'll take a look at that. But definitely, after the 666, then it talks about Pharaoh lifting up your head from you and hanging you on a tree. And so, what's interesting is that we see a connection to the head of Daniel's statue, and then hanging you on a tree is a picture of crucifixion. And then the birds will eat your flesh off of you, which is a terrible picture. Okay, so then it goes on, Genesis 40:22. And then, so this is kind of like the fulfillment now of Joseph's prophecies. Thus it came about on the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast for all his servants, and he lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker among his servants. He restored the chief cupbearer to his office, and he put the cup into Pharaoh's hand, but he hanged the chief baker just as Joseph had interpreted to him. Okay, so the 3rd day, remember that resurrection happened on the 3rd day. It's interesting that it was mentioned on the 3rd day was Pharaoh's birthday. So Pharaoh could be a picture of um, Jesus, so it could be a picture of Jesus's birthday. Um, it also could be a picture of, like Iran, kind of resurrecting, so that they could attack Israel. God allowing them to have the power to attack Israel. Um, we could, we also have a lot of those twin stories. So, like Jesus is going to be born at the same time as Obama's going to be born. Um, um, and then, so possible fulfillments. And then it talks about Pharaoh making a feast for all his servants. That could be a picture of God is now going to be using Israel's enemies to execute judgment. And so so they hung the chief baker. So it's kind of interesting because the story, it seems like the story is repeated twice. And I'm wondering if that is because then Trump becomes the chief baker that gets hung, when there's judgment. Because, like, a very interesting connection could be, how in the picture, in the story of Esther, it's like we have Haman's sons are killed and then they're like hung on the next day, so it's like they get killed twice. Um, so what I think what we're seeing is that, it's like two different groups, like experiencing judgment for similar things at two different times. Um, and so like kind of the repeating of the story is, the second time is Trump getting hung. Okay, so then Genesis 40:23 says, "Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him." So what if Obama returns to office? He won't remember Trump, or he's not going to remember Jesus, you know, um, something like that. Okay, and so just some verses about the cup of wrath. Then another angel, the one who has power over fire, came out from the altar, and he called with a loud voice to him who had the sharp sickle, saying, "Put in your sharp sickle and gather the clusters from the vine of the earth, because her grapes are ripe." So the angel swung his sickle to the earth and gathered the clusters from the vine of the earth and threw them into the great winepress of the wrath of God. And the winepress was trodden outside the city, and blood came out from the winepress up to the horse's bridle for a distance of 200 miles. So actually, it's kind of interesting because the angel who had the power over fire could be a picture of Trump. He comes out from the altar and he says, "Let's gather the clusters from the vine of the earth because their grapes are ripe." It's like Trump saying, it's time now to do the deal of the century. And so the angel swings his sickle to the earth and gathers the clusters from the vine of the earth and throws them into the great wine press of the wrath of God, like very similar to the grapes being squished into the cup, Pharaoh's cup. And then it's interesting that it says the wine press was trodden outside the city, because we see Jonah sat east of the city. So maybe kind of this picture of, all the pressing of the wine happened outside of Israel because it happened in America. But it affected Israel. Okay. And then, so then in Revelation 16 we have, "And I saw coming out of the mouth of the dragon, and out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet, 3 unclean spirits like frogs. For they are spirits of demons performing signs which go out to the kings of the whole world to gather them together for the war of the great day of God the Almighty. Behold, I am coming like a thief. Blessed is the one who stays awake and keeps his clothes, so that he will not walk about naked, and men will not see his shame." And they gathered them together to the place which in Hebrew is called Armageddon. Then the seventh angel poured out his bowl upon the air, And a loud voice came out of the temple from the throne, saying, "It is done." And there were flashes of lightning and sounds and peals of thunder, and there was a great earthquake, such as there has not been since man came to be upon the earth. So great an earthquake was it, and so mighty. The great city was split into 3 parts, and the cities of the nations fell. Babylon the Great was remembered before God to give her the cup of the wine of his fierce wrath. And every island fled away, and the mountains were not found. And huge hailstones, about 100 pounds each, came down from heaven upon men. And men blasphemed God because of the plague of the hail, because its plague was extremely severe. Okay, so what I'm seeing in these verses is the dragon is, connected to Obama, so what we could be seeing as frogs coming out of, like, people connected to the prince who is to come. So that could be like the Iranian leader. It could be other people that are enemies of Israel. So frogs are coming out of their mouths. We see frogs coming out of the mouth of the beast, would be a picture of Trump. Frogs coming out of the mouth of the frost prophet would be a picture of Netanyahu. And then, so it was 3 unclean spirits like frogs, which is interesting that it's 3 because that connects to the 666. Because it says they are spirits of demons performing signs. Each of the 666 are signs. And so these, go out to the kings of the whole world to gather them together for the war of the great day of God the Almighty. And then, it's like Jesus says, "Behold, I am coming like a thief. Blessed is the one who stays awake and keeps his clothes, so that he will not walk about naked and men will not see his shame." We want to keep our clothes. We don't want to get naked and follow Trump. And then it says, we don't want to be ashamed because we followed the wrong Messiah. And then it says, and they gathered them together. Okay, so this is going back to gathering people for the war. And they gathered them together to the place which in Hebrew is called Armageddon. Then the 7th angel poured out his bowl upon the air. A loud voice came out of the temple from the throne saying, "It is done." Okay, so that's kind of interesting because the 7th angel poured out his bowl upon the air saying, "It is done." So kind of like we see the end of the last great day of the feast. We're done with the 666 and the deal of the century. And so then what happens is it follows by, and there were flashes of lightning and sounds and peals of thunder. And there was a great earthquake. We did see a 7.7 earthquake, but I don't think, this says an even bigger earthquake, such as never been seen. So great an earthquake and so mighty. And then it goes on to talk about the great city was split into 3 parts, and the cities of the nations fell. So one connection that I have to that is you have the 3 groups of people splitting into their factions. So you have Obama's followers, you have Trump's followers, and you have Messiah's followers. And then it says, Babylon the Great was remembered before God to give her the cup of the wine of his fierce wrath. So after judgment on Israel, then God's going to remember Babylon the Great, which I think connects to Trump. Because, there's buying and selling in Babylon. And every island fled away, and the mountains were not found, and huge hailstones. Okay, so I thought this verse was interesting because it says, and huge hailstones, about 100 pounds each, came down from heaven upon men. Okay, so remember the men, the Jewish people are the men. And then men blasphemed God because of the plague of the hail, because its plague was extremely severe. So one thing, remember in the story of Exodus, the plague of hail, it's like burning hailstones, So I'm wondering if what God is describing here is missiles, maybe nuclear missiles, um, because it talks about the plague being extremely severe, and so this is a picture of the judgment on Israel. So we already read about the two martyrs, but I just wanted to emphasize, the Sodom and Egypt, because, I see here another picture of the two um, judgments, you know. Um, and then, okay, remember what I was going to say about these last verses. Okay, so I wanted to read this article from Jerusalem Post, because we see in this article, I don't have the whole article, I just have part of the article. But what we see is kind of the reaction even before the Trump plan was released. We already saw, the Arabs responding. But so let me read this article because I want you to see how they're responding. So Mahu Abbas. Okay, so it's 1,000 no's to the Trump plan. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas delivers a speech following the announcement by the U.S. President Donald Trump of the Mideast peace plan in Ramallah in the Israeli-occupied West Bank. Okay. So he delivered a speech. Okay, referring to the plan as the slap of the century, Abbas said that he did not find anything new in Trump's announcement. Palestinians from across the political spectrum, across the political spectrum, have strongly rejected U.S. President Donald Trump's plan for Mideast peace, which was unveiled by the White House on Tuesday. So, I don't think that Trump's plan is going to bring peace to the Middle East, but one thing it is doing is it's causing, like the different Arab factions to join together. So it's kind of interesting. That goes back to those verses where, the frogs, the demon frogs are gathering people. So Trump's actions are at least bringing unity to Israel's enemies. Okay, so we say 1,000 no's to this deal, Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas said. Referring to the plan as the slap of the century, Abbas said he did not find anything new in Trump's announcement. We heard 2 years ago that he recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital, he said. They kept asking us to wait until the plan is announced. Now we see that we were right when we rejected it from the beginning. Jerusalem is not for sale. Our rights are not for sale. The plot of the century won't pass, and it will end up in the dustbin of history. Abbas claimed that Trump's plan was based on the Balfour Declaration devised by the US and UK to liquidate the Palestinian cause. All schemes to liquidate the Palestinian cause will fail. Abbas announced that he will immediately start taking measures that require changing the role of the Palestinian Authority in accordance with resolutions taken by the PLO. He did not specify the nature of the measures. Just as a side note, I do consider this guy to be a liar. So his mention about the Balfour Declaration is not accurate. Okay, so the PL institutions have previously called for revoking Palestinian recognition of Israel, halting security coordination with Israel in the West Bank, and renouncing signed agreements between the PA and Israel. Palestinian officials. So it's kind of interesting because, the deal of the century calls for the Palestinians to recognize Israel as a state. Okay, they don't want to do that. And they've called, to not do that. And then they've even called, um, the PLO has called them to, stop coordinating, security things with Israel. Um, and they want to, cut down all the signed agreements that they have. And then Palestinian officials and political factions vowed to work toward thwarting the plan, also known as the Deal of the Century, on the pretext that it aims to liquidate the Palestinian cause. Abbas was speaking during an emergency meeting of Palestinian officials in Ramallah on Tuesday evening to discuss ways, so they didn't waste any time. Tuesday evening, right after it was announced, they were already meeting to discuss ways of responding to the Trump plan. Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad representatives were invited to participate in the meeting. So, terrorists, basically. In a televised address, Abbas called the plan a conspiracy, adding that his people's rights are not for sale. I say to Trump and Netanyahu, Jerusalem is not for sale. So it's interesting that he talks about it like he owns Jerusalem. Who owns Jerusalem? All our rights are not for sale, and are not for bargain. And your deal, the conspiracy, will not pass, he said. Before the meeting, PLO and Fatah officials expressed outrage over Trump's plan and warned it would have dangerous consequences on stability and peace in the Middle East. See how, this plan is awakening the dragon, just awakening these terrorist groups. The officials expressed hope that the PA leadership would take faithful and firm measures in response to the American Zionist plot called the Deal of the Century. Hamas spokesman Sami Abu Zuhri said the announcement of Trump's plan has no value and it's not worth the ink it was written with. So it's interesting that they say that on one hand, but then they're all getting all in a tizzy about it. So, is it have no value? Then why are you paying so much attention to it? In a first response to the unveiling of the plan, he said Palestine will prevail and Trump and the deal will go to the dustbin of history. A statement by several Palestinian factions in the Gaza Strip, released shortly after the announcement of the plan, read, "No occupier shall remain on our land." Scary, huh? Jerusalem will remain the eternal capital of Palestine. It will remain an Arab and Islamic city. Okay, so they call the Jewish people occupiers. So that's scary that they say no occupiers shall remain on our land. The PA requested an emergency meeting of Arab League foreign ministers on Saturday to discuss Trump's plan. So that's, even a couple days before the release of the plan. Abbas asked that he address the session to explain the Palestinian stance regarding the plan. Senior Fatah official, I don't know how to say that name, Rajoub, who met in Cairo with Arab League Secretary General Ahmed Abul Gates and delivered to him the request for the emergency meeting, expressed hope that the Arab states would reject Trump's proposals and any plan that contradicts the 2002 Arab Peace Initiative and the United Nations resolutions. So there would be one of the, peace initiatives that's already in place, so, just like we had Obama with the Iran deal, ended up overturning, certain treaties with Iran that were already in place, and putting in this new deal that doesn't work. We see the exact same thing happening with President Trump, overturning things that people worked hard to put into place, to put into something that's not going to work. Palestinians took to the streets in several locations across the West Bank and Gaza Strip to protest Trump's plan. At some of the protests, demonstrators burned effigies and posters of Trump and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, as well as Israeli and U.S. flags. In downtown Ramallah, dozens of Palestinians gathered in the evening at Menorah Square, chanting slogans against Trump and Israel. The protesters vowed to foil the dubious Trump plot and urged Palestinians to launch popular resistance activities in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. Similar protests took place on Tuesday evening in Nablus, Jenin, and Hebron. Palestinians in the Gaza Strip also demonstrated during the day to protest Trump's plan. The protests did not attract large numbers of demonstrators. Well, that's good. Tuesday's protests came in the context of the Day of Rage announced earlier this week by several Palestinian factions in response to the peace plan. So they called Tuesday to be a day of rage, and then Wednesday was also called to be a day of rage. Interesting that they call it day of rage. See the anger there? The factions said more protests would take place in the West Bank and Gaza Strip in the coming days. Okay, so they like to protest on Friday, which is interesting that January 31st is a Friday. Shortly before Trump announced his plan, and you do know it has to do with, because you know how Friday is their prayer day, their Sabbath. So shortly before Trump announced his plan, Hamas leader Ishmael Haniyeh phoned Abbas and offered to work together to foil the deal. So see, they're all gathering together. Haniyeh expressed Hamas support for Abbas' opposition to the plan and all schemes to liquidate the Palestinian cause. First and foremost, the deal of the century, according to a statement released by the PA president's office. Haniyeh urged Abbas to lay aside their differences and stand united against Trump's plan, these statements said. See how it's causing Israel's enemies to gather? Lay aside their differences and stand united against Israel and America. Abbas also received a phone call from European Union President Charles Michel and discussed the Trump plan with him. Abbas said he explained to Michel why the Palestinians were opposed to the plan, saying it is in violation of international law. Any peace initiative that ignores Palestinian sovereignty over East Jerusalem is unacceptable. Although, Trump did talk about giving them East Jerusalem, so I'm not really sure why he said that. Of course, they didn't even really read the plan anyway, so they're just protesting. So then there's this other article here too, because let me read the caption on the photo. Palestinian protesters burned pictures of Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu during a demonstration in the West Bank city of Ramallah on January 28, 2020. So the day the deal of the century was released. So this is, I don't have the article, I just have the title page. So analysis, the Israeli rights dream come true. The Israeli rights dream come true could end in brutal nightmare. The U.S. has made annexation a realistic prospect, and some Israeli defense officials are very worried about the potential for violent repercussions of such a move. So they were actually, the Israeli defense officials, were already preparing for, repercussions, so, they definitely have to be on high alert because of what's going on. Okay. So I wanted to mention, don't get on the Trump train. Okay. So, don't think this is a great thing, this deal of the century. It is not a good thing at all. Okay. So, because this is a peace plan that does not bring peace, peace and safety, but there is no peace. Because, it's just, you're dreaming if you think you can make peace with the Palestinians. They're terrorists. They're Israel's enemies. If you really followed history and studied history, you would understand you can't make a peace plan with them, and all he's going to end up doing is getting them mad. Okay, so this is from Matthew 34. And then, so Jesus, as he was sitting on the Mountain of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, "Tell us, when will these things happen? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" And Jesus answered and said to them, "See to it that no one misleads you. For many will come in my name, saying, 'I am the Christ,' and will mislead many. Then they will deliver you to tribulation and will kill you, and you will be hated by all nations because of my name." Okay, so I highlighted, "See to it that no one misleads you, for many will come in my name." Okay, so one of the things is like coming in my name, like people coming like they're the Messiah. Okay. Because name kind of really kind of connects to your position. Um, and so they'll say, "I am the Messiah," and will mislead many. Okay, well, so Trump's not saying he's the Messiah, but he's also not saying he isn't. But he did kind of say he was the chosen one on August 21st. Um, you know, after, a year after, 2 years after the Great American Solar Eclipse. Okay, so then it was kind of interesting that it says, "For many will come," so Jesus is talking about there's going to be false messiahs, and then they will deliver you to tribulation. So I'm wondering if, we're seeing, a prophetical shadow of that the deal of the century will lead Israel into tribulation. Okay, so it said, "At that time many will fall away and will betray one another and hate one another. Many false prophets will arise and will mislead many, because lawlessness is increased. Most people's love will grow cold, but the one who endures to the end, he will be saved." Okay, so I see like lawlessness increasing during like the impeachment trials, a really good picture of that. Like all these false witnesses coming out of the woodwork, etc., and so on. Just a lot of people lying, a lot of people not telling the truth. Um, you know, anyways, and so one of the things we want to do is to endure to the end. Okay, don't get on the Trump train, don't get on the Obama train, don't fall off the Messiah train, just hang in there. And then it says, "Then if anyone says to you, 'Behold, here is the Christ,' or 'There he is,' do not believe." Okay, so don't believe people that say President Trump is the Christ, or President, Trump is the anointed one, or whatever you want to call it. "For false Christs," and I wrote false messiahs, "and false prophets will arise and show great signs and wonders," a picture of Trump and Netanyahu, "so as to mislead, if possible, even the elect." Okay, so I think what we see is this picture of God has allowed him to come in. I mean, we're really in a time of testing. Who are we going to follow? Are we going to, stand our ground and, wait for Jesus, and not look for false messiahs to do what, is supposed to be Jesus's job. And then God said, "Behold, I have told you in advance," or Jesus said that. I mean, really, God has told us in advance that we're going to have false messiahs, so we shouldn't be surprised that here we have someone right here in our midst, being a false messiah. "So if they say to you, 'Behold, he is in the wilderness,' do not go out, or 'Behold, he is in the inner rooms,' do not believe. For just as the lightning comes from the east and flashes even to the west, so will the coming of the Son of Man be. Wherever the corpse is, there the vultures will gather." Okay. So the dead man will cause the vultures to gather. So what I wrote was, okay, it talks about the lightning coming from the east. So it was interesting that the deal of the century happened in the White House East Room, when he made the announcement. And then, it's kind of interesting that it talks about the corpse. There, the vultures were gathered. We see a connection to the story in Joseph where the birds are going to eat the bread out of the basket, or they're going to eat the body, that's being crucified. Okay, so now learn the parable from the fig tree. When its branch has already become tender and puts forth its leaves, you know that summer is near. Okay. So the deal is that you want a fig tree with good fruit, not just leaves. Okay, so Trump is the fig tree that only has leaves. And then it's kind of interesting that it says when it's got leaves, you know that summer is near. So Trump is the summer fig tree. I think what you want is the winter fig tree, because I think winter is the time of judgment. And so when the Messiah comes, he's going to bring judgment. He's going to bring winter to God's enemies. And like in the prophets, we read about the real good fruit, the real good figs, and the real bad figs. Okay, and so I think we see that with Trump. It's the bad, the bad figs. Um, okay, and so I talked about, we have the Sea of Obama. Okay, remember the sea connects to the lies of the Antichrist. But we also have the Sea of Trump because he's got his own set of lies. And that you want to be in the middle, the dry land with Messiah in the middle where there's no lies. Okay, so that's my video for today. So I hope you see how, Trump has filled his cup with the grapes of wrath, and just see how prophecy is being fulfilled. We're seeing it, play out, on a daily basis practically these days. So definitely want you to hang in there, look up for your redemption draws nigh, wait for the Messiah. I think we're going to see him really soon. I mean, I really think it's the next step, you know. Um, I'm not really sure what other steps we have to wait for. I mean, maybe just waiting to see, the Arabs kind of, the terrorists kind of gathering together. I don't know how long it will take for them to get their stuff together, you know. Um, so that's all I can see, but I could be missing something, obviously. Because remember, I call myself the partial prophet because I only know in part and I prophesy in part. So I definitely could be missing something. So that's what I'm seeing today. And so I really thank you for listening to my video. Definitely hang in there. Jesus, is right at the door. You know, I believe, you know. So hang in there. I love you. God bless. Thanks so much for listening.